Thank you for being here this evening as we celebrate the launch of this wonderful new book, Portrait of a Citizen by Dr. Alex Ames. We are also celebrating tonight and commemorating the 250th arrival of Stephen Girard to Philadelphia, which happened this weekend in the beginning of June in 1776, so it is our own 250th. Alex told me to skip all of the honorifics and degrees and so forth, but in case anybody doesn't know him, I should at least say that Alex Ames is the Senior Director of Collections Engagement, did I get that right, at the Rosenbach Museum and Library, which is about 2 miles south of us on 20th Street. Alex actually occupies the office that I left when I moved from the Rosenbach in 2017 to come take the position here at Girard College. I am the Director of Historical Resources here at Girard College, which means that I am a one-person operation. I run the museum, the library, deal with historic buildings, deal with a lot of things with alumni. Basically, if it has anything to do with old stuff, it's mine. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at any point about the building, about Stephen Girard, about Girard College. Most important question, the bathrooms are back there if you need them. They're in the back vestibule, ladies on the left, gents on the right. My connection with Alex goes way back, but our connection over Stephen Girard happened somewhat serendipitously because he was working on an exhibition about Melville at the Rosenbach a few years back. And I happened to mention to him that we have this photograph, actually a couple of photographs, of a ship that belonged to Stephen Girard, which was called the Rousseau. And it, after Stephen Girard's death, was sold to be a whaling ship and was actually one of the last became a sort of a tourist attraction in its own right. It became very famous, and it was broken up finally in the 1890s. And we have photographs of this whaling ship that had belonged to had originally belonged to Stephen Girard, framed in the wood from the ship itself, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was asking, do you want this for the exhibition? And oh, by the way, did you know that Herman Melville name-checked Stephen Girard in Billy Budd? And so this was the beginning of a deep, deep rabbit hole. So why would somebody who was a merchant, eventually becoming the richest man in America through trade, banking, and real estate, why is he naming his ship after French philosophers? What is going on here? And that was, I think, the seed that got Alex's wheels turning. And then, as with many projects, it took a lot of twists and turns around the way and ultimately led to this book, Portrait of a Citizen, Stephen Girard, mariner, merchant, banker, and philanthropist of the early American Republic. So without further ado, I would love to have Alex take the stage and tell you more about what he has put together. Alex?
Thank you, Kathy. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for your warm words of welcome and introduction, and for everything that you've done to support my research and writing over the past several years. I simply could not have completed this project without you, and I will always be grateful for your generosity with your time and expertise. And I also want to thank all of you here this evening who have taken your time on a Friday night to join us for this occasion. Around the 250th anniversary of Stephen Girard's arrival in Philadelphia, as we approach that other big 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation, I hope that this evening's voyage into an important, very Philadelphian story will inspire you as much as it inspires me. Why don't we start with the more famous of these two semiquincentennials that I just mentioned, that of the Declaration of Independence. Images like this one on the screen are the stuff of legend here in Philadelphia and far beyond, the moment when this city emerged as the center of a global political realignment with the drafting and ratification of the Declaration of Independence in the summer of 1776, the first time in history that a nation was founded and organized around intellectual principles. The Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution earned Philadelphia a lasting reputation as a city where the Enlightenment, a global political intellectual movement, manifested as a set of civic actions toward building a new civil society. Now, the Declaration and the Constitution certainly are the most famous Enlightenment-infused documents written here in Philadelphia, but they're by no means the only ones. And tonight, we are going to focus our attention on another. I would like to propose to you that the last will and testament of Stephen Girard, written more than 50 years after Jefferson and the Committee of Five drafted the Declaration, is in fact an Enlightenment-inspired text, focused squarely on the same Republican state-building project that animated the work of the famous Founding Fathers, characterized by all of the promises and all of the shortcomings that shaped the charter documents of our national government. As we reflect on the meaning and significance of the upcoming birthday of the United States of America, I believe that Stephen Girard should figure in our shared conversation. Though the focus of the summer's attention will rightly be on Thomas Jefferson, the Second Continental Congress, and the ensuing Revolutionary War, I believe this is also the perfect time to revisit the legacy of Stephen Girard, both because he has something profound to teach us and because this moment of national reflection encourages us to bring a nuanced perspective to Girard's legacy, afforded by the years of distance from this complex man's life. Stephen Girard has been an extremely difficult figure for Americans to understand and interpret, in no small part because the many wonderful books and articles that have been written about him have struggled to situate him in a framework that really allows us to make sense of this enigmatical figure's human motivations. My goal is to do just that. In my new book, Portrait of a Citizen, I take an approach to the life and work of Stephen Girard that I hope can inspire further conversation in our community about Girard's motivations and impact, and about the qualities of responsible citizenship. My approach focuses on the idea of self-fashioning, or the notion that Girard lived at a unique moment in history when he could, and in fact did, choose to become something other than what he was born. Girard was born a subject of the King of France. He chose, for reasons both practical and idealistic, to become a devoted citizen of the revolutionary American Republic. He wrote very little in the way of self-reflective prose during his lifetime, but by studying the surviving records and artifacts of Girard's life, housed almost entirely here in Founders Hall, we can start to piece together this process of personal transformation that had dramatic implications for the city of Philadelphia and everyone associated with this college today. After haphazardly arriving in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776, Girard actively chose to pursue his business interests in America, casting his lot with a new republic. Economic imperatives may have shaped his initial choices, but as Girard aged in Philadelphia, he came to find personal meaning through civic volunteerism, local leadership, and community identity that reached a climactic moment in his last will and testament. In Girard, we see how the ideology of the new nation could turn a European subject into an American citizen. Girard's life also underscores the inequities that sat at the heart of the early American Republican experiment. As we'll discuss shortly, and as many of you doubtless already know, Girard famously limited his charity here at the college to white male orphan boys, setting up generations of civic controversy and legal action over his last will and testament. Again, in this way, Girard and his will become the embodiment of the American experiment writ large. The fascinating and frustrating thing about this man is that he was simultaneously a progressive, innovative, intelligent philanthropist, and he was deeply committed to racial and gender hierarchy in a way that was antiquated even for his own time. I believe that the only way for us to try to make sense of his worldview and his lasting legacy is to situate the last will and testament in the world of 18th century Enlightenment philosophy, the world that shaped so much of Stephen Girard's thought process early in his life. I offer you my reflections this evening with a good deal of humility, because one thing I've learned after spending several years diving into the collection here at Founders Hall is that Stephen Girard produced an immense, almost immeasurable quantity of historical records, making it a daunting task to try to wrap one's mind around his life, accomplishments, and shortcomings. So much work remains to be done to unlock this man's story. But I do feel confident in offering this book to you as one further step in trying to understand this man, focused on interpreting Girard's life within the context of the rapidly evolving political, civic, and cultural context of his day. Ultimately, I believe that Girard holds urgent lessons for Americans today, not because he was a great guy, or for that matter, because he was some sort of perfect villain of the early American Republic. No, he was really neither of these things. Girard must interest us today because he found himself living day by day in a society rife with opportunity and challenges, dealing with successes and disappointments, needing to negotiate his own priorities and values within the fraught cultural context and moral system of his era. This makes him not so very different from you and me. In my presentation, I'll walk you through some basic details about Girard's early years and rise as a businessman before turning to the pivotal years between 1780 and 1800, when he emerged as this model citizen of the Republic. Then we'll consider his will. Next, I'll tell you what you can encounter in the book, and finally, I'll close with some reflections on the wonderful heritage preservation work that Girard College undertakes here at Founders Hall. More than anything, I hope that this evening gives you some new information and ideas to carry with you into this very exciting and important summer, when we will all ask one eternal question: what does it mean to be an American? It's a question that I suspect Stephen Girard spent a good deal of time himself considering. Let's begin with some foundational details about Girard's early life and career, which set the stage for his eventual voyage into American history. Girard was born in 1750 in a small town outside of Bordeaux, France, to a family of minor prominence in business and the state. Previous generations had distinguished themselves in the French Navy and in maritime business, so it's little wonder that Stephen eventually ended up at sea. Though he enjoyed socioeconomic advantages, Girard faced two challenges during his boyhood that shaped the rest of his life. First, he was born with or developed at an early age a disability, namely a non-functioning right eye, the source not only of partial blindness, but of physical discomfort throughout his life, as well as a social embarrassment. With age, the eye became more unsightly, which led to teasing during his youth and may have contributed to Girard's famously cantankerous personality in older age and his rejection of the trappings of high society after he made his fortune. Second, and even more difficult for Girard, was the death of his mother in 1762 when he was still a boy, and his father's remarriage to the daughter of a Caribbean merchant. Experiencing volatility in the home life of his newly blended family, Girard's father secured the headstrong boy a place on a trading vessel bound for Saint-Domingue, France's highly lucrative plantation colony in the Caribbean that was powered by a brutal system of enslaved labor. Girard never again resided in France. As he learned the mariner's skills and acquired his captain's license, Girard continued to engage in transatlantic imperial trade, though the canny businessman eventually realized that trade between the Caribbean and Britain's North American colonies would require shorter voyages while returning higher profits. Shifting his focus, he settled in New York in 1775, and he may have ended up a famous early resident of New York instead of Philadelphia, if not for one fateful voyage a year later in 1776. During the spring of that year, Girard served as captain of a vessel named the Jeune Bébé and found himself in a precarious predicament. Voyaging between the Caribbean and the home port of New York, the voyage had proved ill-fated. High winds and thick fogs had beset the vessel. Our navigator, experienced as he was by this point, had lost a sense of location. And most worrisome in the storms, the mast of the vessel had cracked and most of its fresh water was lost. The crew grew restless, and the 26-year-old captain determined that the vessel would need to reprovision, as we learn in this rather difficult to read ship's log that you see here on the screen. Yet politics presented just as big a problem as the weather, given that relations between Great Britain and her North American colonies continued to deteriorate. When the Junbei encountered an English vessel, the HMS Kingfisher, Girard hoped that the ship might reprovision the Junbei with water, which the Kingfisher's captain declined to do. Girard decided to sail into Philadelphia south of the home port in New York. This decision shaped the rest of Girard's life. Upon entering Philadelphia in June 1776, around when Richard Henry Lee introduced a motion for independence at the Second Continental Congress, Girard had quite haphazardly steered his vessel into the center of a global shift in politics. Talk about incredible timing for this young, enterprising man. He sensed opportunity amid the evolving crisis, as well as, of course, considerable risk in putting out to sea again anytime soon. So he decided to set up shop in his new city, figuratively and literally. In 1777, he married a local woman named Mary Lum, a daughter of an Irish Catholic shipbuilder in the city, with whom Girard had business dealings. And on October 27, 1778, Girard took the oath of allegiance and fidelity as directed by an act of the General Assembly of Pennsylvania, which really was an important step in his shifting conception of his identity and prospects. The next several years would bring business success and unanticipated personal challenges, which set Girard up for the civic engagement and philanthropy for which we remember him today. Now, the years 1780 to 1800 are very important in understanding how Stephen Girard emerged as the figure in local civic life that he became during the years of the early Republic. And there were really three developments that emerged during this time, and they all sort of were swirling together. The first is Girard's steady rise as a leading merchant. Second is the tragedy of his home life as his wife, Mary Lum, succumbed to mental illness, and Girard's hopes for a serene marriage with children rapidly evaporated. Third, balancing these two realities, Girard seems to have consciously or unconsciously engaged in self-fashioning, by which I mean molding his self-concept as a patriarch of the city, as someone still deeply attached to his French culture, through civic works and leisure pursuits. I believe that this self-fashioning as a model citizen served as a replacement for the home life that Girard eventually came to lack, as he searched for meaning amid his financial success and laid the groundwork for the greatest civic acts of his lifetime, and really the reason we're all here tonight, the last will and testament. I will walk you through each of these three entwined developments in Girard's life. First, between 1780 and 1800, Girard established himself as Philadelphia's leading merchant. His rise was actually comparatively slow as he assembled capital to build his own ships around the turn of the century and expanded from Caribbean trade to global pursuits. Girard's penchant for commercial risk, at least in maritime trade, earned him big rewards, and by 1800 he owned several vessels and oversaw a wide-ranging commercial network stretching from Philadelphia to ports in the Pacific. His greatest ascent, however, did not really begin until the War of 1812, when, on the eve of armed conflict with Great Britain, Girard very wisely brought assets home to American shores and capitalized a private bank here in Philadelphia, much to the shock of fellow businessmen who for the first time realized just how wealthy Stephen Girard had truly become. By the 1820s, he was probably the wealthiest man in the United States. Now, while he achieved stratospheric success in his business undertakings, he suffered notable setbacks in his personal life, which derailed his early ideals of domestic happiness and which set the stage for his personal commitment to civic volunteerism and philanthropy. Several years after his marriage to Mary Lum in 1777, Mrs. Girard began showing symptoms of mental illness. Girard tried to manage her care at home, first in Philadelphia and then the couple's house in New Jersey, but to no avail. In 1790, he committed her to the care of the Pennsylvania hospital, where she spent the rest of her life. The couple had no surviving children, and Girard never remarried or had children with other women, to the best of our knowledge. Importantly for posterity, the reason I'm telling you this sort of gossip is that he had no direct heirs to his fortune, which, needless to say, bears mightily on the eventual dispensation of his estate. Now, Girard did reside in a lively household. Many nieces came to live with him at various points, and he worked with a perpetual stream of indentured servants and apprentices. An enslaved woman named Hannah also lived in Girard's household. She had been enslaved by Stephen's brother, Jean Girard, in Saint-Domingue, and Jean had fathered a daughter named Rosette, who came also to live for a time in the household of Stephen Girard. The actual legal standing of these women in Philadelphia is ambiguous because of the Commonwealth's Gradual Abolition Act, but their presence in the Girard household underscores the brothers' personal connection to the slave economy, while also illuminating that many people resided in the Girard household at this time. Now, these women whom I just mentioned, Hannah and Rosette, are only the best known individuals whom Girard enslaved in Philadelphia. Several other enslaved people appear in the historical record as well, and you see their names on the screen now: a woman named Mary and her son Sam, a man named Abraham, among others. And I think the reality that we have to acknowledge is that it's very likely that there are many, many more individuals connected to Girard in this way, enslaved by him or otherwise, who just haven't yet been encountered in the archive because it's such a vast set of primary source materials that this is probably a work in progress in terms of the list of people enslaved by Girard. I'll mention as well, Girard regularly employed free black mariners on board his vessels sailing out of Philadelphia, so it's a complicated story. Girard also developed long-term relationships with various women who resided in his home as de facto wives. So it seems likely that at some point between his wife's committal and her death, Girard's fully mature sense of self began to shift toward the body politic as compared to a family legacy, sort of establishing his own family here in Philadelphia and building a kind of dynasty here in the city. Rather than blood heirs, Girard, in his will, chose to identify civic heirs. In a letter to his brother in 1785, Girard wrote, and I quote, "I fear that I have lost forever the peace which a certain success should procure for life in this world." This sense of loss, which we're fortunate, frankly, to encounter in this particular letter, set the stage for a search for meaning and purpose elsewhere. This brings us to the third point I mentioned. Bear in mind that Girard arrived in Philadelphia as a young, upwardly mobile man, just as the city and colonies embarked on revolution. He immersed himself in a civic culture rife with Republican ideologies. When I say republicanism, what I mean is an ideal form of government that early American political leaders adapted from ancient Rome and Renaissance Italy, in which a group of privileged leading citizens would govern the state as a corporate body, concerned for the benefit of all citizens and not primarily focused on their own self-interest. Parallel to the decline in Girard's domestic situation, we see him deepen his commitment to civic life in alignment with the Republican ideal. In 1793, he volunteered to help lead Philadelphia's response to the yellow fever epidemic. He aided Latin American revolutionaries in acquiring arms to wage war against Spain. And during the War of 1812, he bailed out the federal government in partnership with John Jacob Astor of New York and the Treasury Secretary, a fellow Francophone, Albert Gallatin. Girard was naturalized as a U.S. citizen in 1794 and seemed to take seriously his identity and responsibility as a citizen of a new republic. Before we move on to the main act in Girard's life, I want to make an observation about his complicated status in the local society here in Philadelphia during his lifetime. Girard remained very proud of his French identity, socializing with fellow Francophones and publicly associating his name and business brand with leading lights of French philosophy. As Kathy explained earlier, Girard built 4 philosopher ships, as they became known, in the Kensington shipyards between 1795 and 1806. The Voltaire, the Rousseau, the Helvetius, and the Montesquieu, which reflected, I think, primarily Girard's Enlightenment opinion on religion. In short, Girard seems not to have had much time for faith in a divine being that conflicted with human reason, and this put him increasingly at odds with American society as the 19th century wore on, and it became more devout. The merchant was notably austere in self-presentation, shunning fancy dress, grand architecture, and showy displays of wealth. He made no attempt to impress the upper echelons of local high society. As a French Catholic with a noticeable disability and a rather unorthodox background, Girard embraced the political philosophy of the Republic while paying little heed to the rigors of Philadelphia's social scene. His community certainly recognized him as a leading citizen and figure in social life, as his presence at the Masonic ball to celebrate the Marquis de Lafayette underscores, and you see his ticket to the ball to be with the Marquis here on the screen. But his position was always one of a French immigrant here in the city, not part of the Quaker or Anglican Episcopalian upper crust. Let's move on now to the central problem that my book tries to address. One of the really frustrating but also exciting things about trying to study Stephen Girard, and one of the reasons I think why he has become sort of a unidimensional figure in local history, someone most Philadelphians don't know much about, is that despite his economic importance and the scale of surviving business records that document his life, he wrote very little during his lifetime that shed light on his motivations for his philanthropy or his volunteerism. One of my main research tasks has been developing a strategy to explore and narrate Girard's intellectual, cultural, and civic interests in a way that can offer fresh insight into his life and round out our portrait of the man. Fortunately, a large body of primary sources survives to undertake this work, and you'll be able to see many of them upstairs when you explore the galleries later tonight. When he established Girard College in his will, the merchant banker stipulated that his papers and personal effects should be stored at the school, meaning that there survives today a remarkable cache of archival records, Girard's library, as well as assorted pieces of fine and decorative art, which we get to explore tonight. Finding connections between what Girard read, how he decorated his home, and what he named his vessels helps us identify the cultural forces at work shaping his self-conception. For the sake of time, I'll illustrate with just a few examples, and you can read more in the book about sort of reassembling all of this material culture. Let's begin with a rare narrative description of Girard's living quarters, in this case, his counting house adjacent to his home on Water Street. The text is from a 19th century biography written by one of Girard's collateral descendants, and I invite you to follow along as I read this portion of the text. Quote, "The furniture of this office was of the simplest character, its only ornament being a Chinese drawing of his ship, Montesquieu, presented by one of his supercargoes. He sat and wrote at a mahogany desk, by the side of which stood a small fireproof safe, about 4 1/2 feet high, with 2 doors and a marble top. And this last was piled high with French editions of Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, completing the inventory of this furniture." So in this quote, we encounter some of the key pieces of material culture that survive to this day in the building where we are now residing: books, furniture, and fine art. most important for our purpose is this painting of the Montesquieu, which you see here with her figurehead of the philosophe. So each of these different vessels of these philosopher ships, Girard had a leading sculptor in the city craft little philosophers to lead them over the oceans. Also surviving are the volumes of Voltaire referenced by the author. We know that Girard felt especially fond of Voltaire, not only because of the books that survive today, but because he also owned a marble bust of Voltaire by the famous French artist Jean-Antoine Houdon. Other such connections between books, busts, and maritime vessels abound. Girard also owned a bust of Rousseau, the author who lent his name to Girard's most famous vessel, which Kathy discussed, and here's the photograph of the Rousseau housed here at Girard College. Girard's library also includes volumes of Helvetius, a lesser-known philosophical figure to most people today, but a very radical French philosopher in his era. He was the namesake of another ship, and a portrait of this ship survives at the Independent Seaport Museum, and there you see as well the little Helvetius statue serving as the figurehead for this particular vessel. So we can glean from all of this that Girard remained attached to his French literary and cultural heritage and imbibed deeply of Enlightenment thinking, which influenced his views on religion, education, and self-improvement, all of which, of course, became a focal point for his work in establishing the school on whose campus we now sit. Though his identity may have taken root in his early experiences in Philadelphia during the revolutionary moment, Girard lingers in civic memory largely because of an action that he took at the very end of his life, the writing of his last will and testament. Girard lived to an advanced age, though daily life for him became more difficult as his vision in his one functioning eye gradually diminished. On the afternoon of December 21, 1830, the aging merchant was struck by a horse and carriage at 2nd and Market Streets, which began his slow decline. He died a little more than a year later on December 26, 1831. His decline and death occurred not long after Girard completed a revised version of his will, co-drafted with a very distinguished attorney here in Philadelphia named William J. Duane, over a period of several weeks in 1830. They actually worked together to revise an earlier version of the will, which unfortunately we don't have the contents of that earlier version. But Girard took a very rigorous interest in this collaboration, working with Duane for many hours each day on his philanthropic plans and the wording of the will. And I will describe to you very briefly the contents of this lengthy document. In essence, Girard left meaningful but comparatively small financial bequests to his family members and made donations to various local charities and civic organizations that were already working in the city. But he devoted the vast bulk of the fortune, to the tune of $6 million, to the construction and operation of a charity school for the education of poor white orphan boys. It is clear from Girard's directives as to the recipients of his charity, as well as his plans for the curriculum at the school, that he intended to help young people from circumstances like his own pursue lives of utility and service to the Republican body politic and rise in the world. Interestingly, in the will, Girard indicated that orphan boys from Philadelphia were to receive priority admission, followed by boys from New York and New Orleans, cities where Girard had either lived or worked. His curriculum focused on practical training for viable careers in the trades and in commerce. Quote, "I would have them taught facts and things rather than words or signs," Girard directed. He continued, quote, "I especially desire that by every proper means a pure attachment to our Republican institutions and to the sacred rights of conscience as guaranteed by our happy constitutions shall be formed and fostered in the minds of the scholars." For Girard, the school was both an act of benevolence and an investment in the American civic project. Two of the strictures that Girard's will included guaranteed that his name and last wishes would become a source of litigation and public controversy for generations to come. First, Girard banned clergy from entering the grounds of the school and playing any role in the educational project, claiming in the will that he wished the students' minds to be left to form their own views on religion after they reached their maturity. Now, this reflected very much an attitude on religion in line with the works of people like, say, Rousseau, Thomas Jefferson, other Enlightenment figures who had influenced Girard's personal views, around the time of the Revolution and early Republic, but views that had really quickly faded by the middle of the 19th century. Second, something that wasn't controversial really at all in the early 19th century, the racial and gender admission qualifications became a focal point for Philadelphia's civil rights movement in the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond. So let's just dive a little bit deeper into each of these two moments of litigation, lawsuits, and public controversy. And we'll start with the first of the legal battles, which to us today seems a little archaic, but is important to understand. As I mentioned, Girard's views on religion were, by the middle decades of the 19th century, unconventional and grounded in a perspective rooted in the Enlightenment when deism predominated among many leaders in both France and the United States. Now, by the 1840s, Girard's family members, who unsurprisingly were livid that their wealthy patriarch had left most of his fortune to the city of Philadelphia, they used the religious fervor of their era to their advantage. They sued the city of Philadelphia for the cancellation of Girard's will because the religious ban, they argued, violated religious freedom rights of the students in the proposed school. They hired Daniel Webster to be their lawyer, who gave a very moving speech before the U.S. Supreme Court that fell on ears that were much more skeptical. The case actually lost in the Supreme Court, which ruled that people other than clergy could teach students the principles of religion. The school opened in 1848, but the court battle had turned Girard and his will into household subjects of conversation around that time. A century later, an aspect of Girard's school that really encountered no controversy in the early 19th century became the subject of debate. In the early 1800s, almost all education in Philadelphia was segregated by race, with notable differences in training based on gender. This means that Girard's stipulation that his school educate white boys was in a sense entirely unsurprising, although one can of course ask, if it's a given, why do you have to explicitly state it in the will? So there was a broadening sense of education even at the time that Girard was writing his text. However, over time, the local Black community agitated against the strictures of the will, which, important to remember, the will was enforced by the city of Philadelphia, so by local government. Though the school had originally been located on rural agrarian land outside the city, by the 1800s, especially the end of the century, urban life spread north. And by the mid-20th century, North Philadelphia was a predominantly Black neighborhood. The towering walls of Girard College became a symbol of racial inequity. As early as the 1890s, prominent Black residents had started organizing to undo the racial admissions ban. Over 2 decades, the 1950s and 1960s, leading figures including Raymond Pace Alexander and Cecil B. Moore took the fight to the courts and the streets, resulting in the desegregation of the school by court order in 1968. A wonderful collection of photographs by John W. Mosley, which are held in the Charles L. Blockson collection at Temple University, documents this pivotal moment in the history of the school and our city, as you can see here. And to make a very long and inspiring story short, it was the combination of sort of agitation and protest that turned up the political pressure with a sustained, legal battle in the courts that eventually led to desegregation here at Girard College. And this is a rather famous photo that many of you may have seen before of the first 4 young Black students, heroically as, in a way, Stephen Girard's heirs, right, coming into the school and beginning their studies here at the school. Now, in the 1980s, the school became co-educational, and it's rather a different story than the story of the racial admissions ban. In an era of enrollment questions, naturally, going co-ed allowed for a much larger student pool to be able to enroll here at the school. And so the college actually was part of the effort here. The school petitioned the Orphans Court on July 8, 1982 to break the gender admissions ban. And in 1984, 31 girls enrolled at the school. And today, Girard College is a progressive educational and innovative educational institution serving a student body consisting almost entirely of students of color of roughly equal gender distribution. In the early 19th century, Stephen Girard codified his vision of Republican citizenship in his will with a focus on equipping white boys of humble means to become servants of the body politic. As American understandings of civic belonging have expanded, Girard's civic heirs, here in Philadelphia, have successfully revised his vision. Though the courts have altered the stipulations of Girard's will and have had to break the will, as the phrase goes, Stephen Girard would probably be very happy to know that the merchant banking fortune remains intact, having appreciated from $6 million in 1831 to $600 million today, under management of the Board of Directors of City Trusts here in Philadelphia. If we take a cynical view of Girard's philanthropic bequest, and I think we kind of have to put those lenses on for a moment, and if we view that bequest as an ingenious wealth preservation strategy, then we can appreciate just how successful this canny banker really was. Stephen Girard remains one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia, though he has been dead for nearly 200 years. These comments will have to serve as just sort of an introductory frame around our portrait of the citizen Stephen Girard. Yet what I've shared with you this evening only scratches at the surface of the incredible historical collections preserved here at Founders Hall. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, one of the first things I realized when I began exploring the life and legacy of Girard is that a history of this man and his time could take many guises. It could be a political history, a business history, a history of philanthropy, a history of family. My book is what I would call heavily interpretive, in that it focuses on a few key questions and themes of interest to me and addresses them using the resources here at Founders Hall that really, the particular pieces that I wanted to explore really haven't much been utilized in terms of an analysis of this man's life and his inner world. In parting, I want to give you a sense of what the book contains to guide your reading of the text. And I have to say, I really hope that someone in the near future or many years from now might find inspiration or have questions about the approach that I took here, and then do something entirely different using the same mountain of incredible collections here housed in this remarkable school. The book's early chapters offer a detailed tracing of Girard's life, his circle of family and friends, situated within the context of early national Philadelphia. But the core of the text has, I will admit to you, a more niche focus: Girard's library, his decorative art, and these philosopherships, intertwining the published books, the manuscript records, and the artworks preserved here at Founders Hall into a portrait of the man quite unlike any that has been written before. Then the book does something that I think I can safely say no previous study has done. It moves, it's a biography of Girard that moves way past this man's actual lifetime. It forges ahead into the generations beyond Girard's death, tracing how his thought world, which was so rooted in 18th century Enlightenment culture, set the stage for the debates over his will all the way through the civil rights movement. Linking the earliest history of Girard and his lifetime to the long saga of Girard College deepens our sense of the importance of the remarkable collections that surround us tonight. As you page through the book, you will realize that one of my chief goals was simply to showcase the rich source material available to the historian of Girard and his times. The book is filled with dozens of images that build our understanding of Girard and help render his intellectual inspirations into material form. If the book does nothing else, I hope that it inspires deeper reflections on how the material artifacts preserved here can help us make sense of the legacy of Girard's world for our own lives today. Girard College, the board of directors of city trusts, Kathy Haas, and everyone here who invests time, funding, and effort to preserve this treasure trove of history does a tremendous service to the city of Philadelphia and to the nation. We learn so much about who we are as a community here within the walls of Founders Hall. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, Portrait of a Citizen also poses civic and moral questions for us to consider. People sometimes ask me if I emerged from this research project liking or disliking Stephen Girard. And the honest answer that I can give you tonight is neither of those things. I see in him the same potential and flaws that have shaped every generation of Americans. And I find myself today less anxious to jump to moral judgment about my fellow citizens, past and present, after having struggled for years to try to make sense of Girard's seemingly contradictory worldview. I view Girard this evening as both an inspirational and a cautionary tale. How grateful we can be for his foresight, his financial prowess, and his commitment to education. Those are all great things. Also, may we never forget that even someone as brilliant and unique as Stephen Girard suffered from perilous shortcomings that to us, viewed from a couple centuries onward, feel blatantly obvious. As I reflect on Girard's shortcomings, I find myself wondering, what are my own blind spots? Where do I fail to discern what I can do to help our republic live into its founding creeds? It's no coincidence that we find ourselves gathered tonight in an institution that Girard founded, one which has evolved in profound ways to update its mission and adapt to serve the changing civic context in which it is immersed. We, all of us, are associated with a variety of institutions in one way or another, and we all enjoy the opportunity and obligation to move them closer to equity, justice, access, inclusivity, and maximum impact on the public good. There are powerful lessons here within these magnificent walls for us tonight, as well as a call to action. Looking to the future, as Girard always did, may we citizens never let go of the full potential for freedom, equality, and opportunity through education for which generations of our ancestors have labored. Thank you.